Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life like the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." Then he was afraid. He got up and fled for his life, and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah. He left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a solitary broom tree. He asked that he might die. "It is enough now. O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the broom tree and fell asleep. Suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, "Get up and eat." He looked, and there at his head was a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. He ate and drank and lay down again. The angel of the Lord came a second time, touched him, and said, "Get up and eat, otherwise the journey will be too much for you." He got up and ate and drank. Then he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the Mount of God. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. Then the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Also, you shall anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, as king over Israel. And you shall anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, of Abel Meholah, as prophet in your place. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill. And whoever escapes from the sword of Jehu, Elisha shall kill. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." The word of the Lord.
So the story that Victor read today about the prophet Elijah picks up after maybe one of the most exciting stories in Scripture. The prophet Elijah had just taken on the prophets of Baal and Asherah, all 850 of them, and he challenges them for a scene that was made for reality TV, a prophet-off, if you will. Israel has been following false gods, and a brief history sidetrack here. After King Solomon, King David's son, after King Solomon's rule, the United Kingdom of Israel has collapsed, in part because of the bills that came about because of Solomon's building projects, the temple. The northern tribes had rebelled against the Davidic line and become Israel in the divided kingdom, and the southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, become the nation of Judah. So Ahab is king of the northern kingdom of Israel, and his wife Jezebel is a foreigner. Now, that marriage had been a political alliance to bring peace on the Phoenician border. And Jezebel brought with her gods from her home. And those gods must have been appealing because there are a lot of prophets. A lot of people are going to those churches. Elijah shows up as the prophet of the one true God and is a thorn in the side of Ahab and Jezebel. They want to silence him because Elijah is trying to call the people back to the one Lord, away from the lure of false gods. And Ahab and Jezebel are trying to keep their political alliance together by promoting the worship of all the gods. Their message is, you want to come to church? You can worship the king, the flag, money, power. You can do it all while worshiping the Lord. Come join us. That message was as seductive then as it is now. And Ahab and Jezebel want to kill Elijah. They've already killed over 100 of God's prophets. And then the reality show happens. And I'll let you read chapter 18 in your free time, but Elijah challenges the prophets to a showdown. It's his God against all of their gods. He even stacks the deck in their favor, and he mocks them, and then he crushes them, and then he kills them all, and then he flees. He flees, which on first glance seems sort of an odd response to the overwhelming victory, right? Ahab, meanwhile, goes back and tells Jezebel what has happened to all of her prophets, and then our story picked up today. Elijah knows all about the power of God. He's just seen it in full and public display. And yet he flees, and he gives up. It's enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. I can't decide if Elijah's humanity here is horribly depressing or very comforting. I'd like to think that if only I could see those awesome acts of power, just like he did on Mount Carmel, that I would have enough faith to spare. I could share it with everybody else. That's just what I need, right? Just one big miracle, one big showdown with the false prophets, and I'll be good. But we're just a few verses after that moment of triumph, right after he's won the battle, and he's asking to die because he feels so alone. He may not be afraid of the false prophets. He mocked them without any problem, but he is certainly afraid of Jezebel and Ahab. And even though he has just seen God put on a resounding display, it does not occur to him that the God who delivered him then is going to deliver him now. We're like that too, of course. Miracles are all around us, even in our own lives. And then something happens. Jezebel comes making her threats, and we go blank. We have a crisis of confidence that erases what we know to be true, and it replaces it with panic and despair. And I don't know why it happened to Elijah, and I don't know why it happens to us, but you'd think the signs and wonders we see would be enough to sustain him. You'd think they'd be enough to sustain us, but they don't. Perhaps this text is a reminder to us that signs and wonders, like the show Elijah puts on before the prophets of Baal in the earlier chapter, those are not what sustain faith. Community sustains faith. And when we're cut off from each other, there aren't enough signs and wonders in the world to make up for it. So perhaps this text is a reminder to us that the voices of this world, those threats from Ahab and Jezebel, they're more than mere words. They are often scary enough to cause us to forget what we know to be true. They are often loud enough to drown out the sound of our faith. They are convincing enough to make us lose hope and give in to despair. This story catches Elijah when he feels completely alone, and totally isolated and so cut off from other people and maybe even God that he feels he alone is left. He had also just killed 850 prophets. So it's possible to imagine that that could also make you feel alone and cut off, no matter if you were doing the right thing. Taking human lives is not a trivial matter. Ahab and Jezebel had also killed hundreds of God's prophets, Elijah's colleagues, some of whom were probably his friends from seminary and presbytery meetings. There's a lot of death in the background of this story, and when we don't allow our grief and our loss to be at the front of our story when it needs to be, that's when we get isolated and cut off from the people who could help us. There's a lot of grief and loss in our world too. When we don't allow our grief and loss to be at the front of our story, we feel isolated and cut off from the people who could help us. I alone am left. When I hear that phrase from Elijah, I hear it as a confession of defeat and failure. I confess, though, that when I think about it in my own life, I am a person who can prize my independence, my aloneness, as if it were a badge of pride. Listen to the difference. I alone am left, sad trombone, or I alone am left, yeah, dun da 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 dun 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 dun, right? It can be two different things. As a child, I was famous for saying, I can do it me own self. Narrator, she could in fact not do it her own self. Asking for help is the hardest thing I ever do. Accepting help that is offered is a close second. Many years ago, when I was back in Boise, I was leading worship when some flu symptoms came on in the middle of service. I was fine that morning, and then halfway through the sermon, I had to sit down. I couldn't even stand up. And then it was communion, and I knew I couldn't stand at the table, and also that whatever I was coming down with meant I probably shouldn't be anywhere near the communion elements with my germs. So I asked an elder, because I was the only pastor at this church, I asked an elder to come up and read the liturgy and preside at communion, which they did without hesitation, although I'm sure they were not thrilled about the idea of having to all of a sudden be doing the job the pastor was supposed to be doing. I also found somebody to take my place teaching the Sunday school class afterwards, and I was just going to go home. I felt like I had already inconvenienced enough people by the end of that service. And someone said they were going to give me a ride home and that their spouse would drive my car home. And I tried to brush them off with, I'll be fine, you don't have to stand up to drive. Maybe not my finest moment. And she demanded my keys, and then they drove me home, and then I slept for 4 days. I'm not proud of that story. I'm very grateful for everybody who would not let me go it alone, and for everybody else at all the other moments of my life who have reminded me that I'm not alone because of their care and their presence and their bossy refusal to let me go it alone. I alone am left. Truly, I'm feeling personally attacked by this scripture passage. I like it a lot better when it convicts you than when it convicts me. Over time, I have learned slowly to accept help when it is offered, and on my better days, I can even ask for it when nobody has offered it. I've been blessed throughout my life with some amazing communities who have cared for me and reminded me that I'm not alone. My family, my sorority, the rest of my college community, actually, all the congregations I've ever been a part of. There's too many communities to name, but all of them have called me away from falling prey to the lie that I alone am left. Like the angel who shows up when Elijah is asleep under the broom tree, my communities have fed and cared for me so the journey wouldn't be too much for me. I was in a Bible study with a colleague looking at this passage, and we noticed that when Elijah whines to God about feeling alone, what does God do? God sends him into the wilderness for 40 more days of being alone. I'm a person who prefers to be in the mix with other people far more than I want to be by myself with only my own thoughts for company. Even when I have to do solitary work like writing sermons, I do it better in the middle of a loud coffee shop than I do in the sheer silence of my empty apartment. It's changing a little bit for me as I get older. I'm a little more inclined to decide a day off spent by myself is not a punishment, but might maybe be a reward, but that's slowly changing. But the idea of 40 more days of isolation when I already feel alone, I do not like that plan. And I think many people are afraid of the silence of their own thoughts because maybe we're afraid about what we'll find there. Will that inner critic be so loud we can't drown them out? Will our fears be revealed to be true? I wonder what God needed Elijah to know, to come to understand when he was feeling alone. What was it that Elijah needed 40 more days of nights and nights of silence by himself in the wilderness to figure out? You think you alone are left, Elijah? All right, have a good time. Gets me twitchy all this time in the wilderness, left alone with my own thoughts. In truth, even when I'm by myself, I'm rarely alone. I can text my friends or call someone. I can be distracted by the earthquakes of the news cycle or the wind of whatever is coming out of Washington or the fires of personal conflicts or stress. I rarely have to be alone. But God draws Elijah away from the tumult and the noise of Jezebel and Ahab and toward the mountain of God. And after that 40-day journey, he reaches the mountain where Moses saw God pass by, and then the earth, wind, and fire appear. And Elijah is told to stand on the mountain as God passes by. But God is not in the noise or the destruction or the chaos or the tumult or the flames. God was in the silence that followed. And I don't think that means that God is absent from the earthquakes or the wind or the fire that disrupt and trouble our lives. We believe there's nothing in life or in death that can separate us from the love of God. But I wonder if it suggests that if we really want to find God, we can't be distracted by the politicians like Ahab's and Jezebel, or by the destruction of human violence, and reach the conclusion that all of the destruction they cause is what God intended, right? Elijah, despite his crisis of confidence, is able to recognize God when God appears. And it seems likely to me that the silence would not have been the place Elijah would have looked for God. Because in the biblical account, when God appears, God's usually in a burning bush or by a pillar of fire by night or a pillar of cloud by day. The word for God's Spirit is the same as the word for wind. And perhaps we expect God to be flashy and put on a show, to wow us with the laser light shows and fog machines, just like God had done the previous chapter in the prophet off. We want God to be earth, wind, and fire. But for Elijah at his weakest moment, God is in the absence of noise, asking, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" That question can mean a lot of things. Why are you here as my prophet, Elijah? Why are you here 40 days into the wilderness and not somewhere else? Why are you here feeling sorry for yourself? Why are you alone and far from other people who could help you? Why are you here, Elijah? And Elijah gives the same answer both times God asks the question. I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, God. Maybe you don't remember this. They have thrown down your altars. They have killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away. It's the same answer both times. I don't know that Elijah actually answers God's question, why are you here? But God seems to hear the answer that is hidden in Elijah's reply. I'm so isolated and alone that I can't remember the things that are important anymore. So God offers Elijah grace and a cake and gives him the answers he needs. He's given some concrete tasks to fulfill. He's told to appoint some kings in various places to clean up the political mess. He's told to appoint Elisha as his successor. He's not alone on either the political nor the spiritual front. And through that sheer silence, God calls him back to his purpose. God gives Elijah answers to the questions God was asking him and sends him back to community and back to work, fed and nourished and equipped for the journey. Elijah had been doing it all himself. He did not take a committee with him to battle the prophets. He had not taken care of himself. He was tired and hungry. He was distracted by all the noises. But thinking about this text has called to mind for me a quote by Corrie ten Boom, a Dutch Christian and a Holocaust survivor, who said, "Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God." Maybe that's what God was trying to get Elijah to see in the midst of this crisis of confidence. As it was for Elijah, the future we cannot see can be a scary place. There are voices all around us telling us to be afraid of just about everything. But the Ahabs and the Jezebels of our world are just speculating. They can cause real damage, don't get me wrong, but they are not the ultimate power of this world. They are noise. And the noise of chaos and tumult and fear are nothing compared to the sound of God. How is it with your soul these days? There's a lot of earthquakey stories out there calling us away from our connectedness to each other and our connectedness to God. So where do you find silence so that you can hear God? This week I had the privilege of waiting outside the ICE building on Sansom Street with a family from the presbytery who needed to go to their immigration check-in, and they were rightly afraid to do so. 2 mornings this week I stood there with them wearing my clergy collar, and it wasn't silent on the downtown street, but I was largely silent because I don't actually speak Spanish. I could not solve any troubles for this family. I couldn't say or do anything really useful, but I could be there. I could offer a smile to the other people in line too and remind them that they weren't alone. And that's where I heard God this week, not in the chaos of the storms that were caused by our government that led those people to be there, not in the flashes of power from weak men pretending to be tough. It was in the presence of people who were scared to show up for their hearings but did it anyway. I debated whether or not even to tell this story because I don't want anyone to think I was doing anything heroic or worthy of praise. There was no risk to me down there. And lots of other people in this room, let alone in the community, have put themselves on the line in far bigger ways. But if I can use my whiteness and my privilege to participate in whatever small way I can so others know they aren't alone, I want to do that. And if you want to be there too, accompanying people outside ICE hearings, talk to one of the pastors later. But there are many other ways we care for people amidst the earthquakes and the winds and the fires of this world. When you volunteer at the Interfaith Food Pantry, or when you sign up to serve lunch at Martin de Porres, or when you volunteer with the youth or with the seniors, the list is long, and many of them are in the back of your bulletin, by the way. The gift of community and the lesson that it was hard both for me and Elijah to learn is that we don't have to do it all by ourselves. If each of us participates in whatever way we're called to participate, people will be cared for, and the journey will not be too much for any of us. It is your gifts of time and treasure and talent that make a difference in the world, because together we get to do exponentially more than any one of us could do alone. So thank you for your generosity that creates community and offers care. Friends, we are walking into an unknown future with a known God. The God who has provided for us in the past is yet now dreaming plans that will guide us through the future. So may we learn to be comfortable listening for God, whether it is in the chaos and tumult or in the silence. Never be afraid to trust our unknown future to a known God. Amen.